Welcome back. So it's Saturday. Normally on a Saturday, I'm just, watching hockey, talking hockey, and doing hockey videos. I want to do something not hockey related for today, and we're going to talk about Archive 81. So I just finished the series like moments before starting this video. Wow. So if you haven't watched Archive 81, it's on Netflix. It's an 8-part series. Each episode's about an hour long, and it's I don't know what words to use to describe it other than it's kind of sort of perfect. So if you like The Shining, if you like Rosemary's Baby, if you like Twilight Zone / Outer Limits, this show's kind of got elements of all of that. It is not overly gory. It is not overly scary either. And it shows that horror doesn't need jump scares. You don't need a bunch of jump scares to make a good horror movie. And I think over the last, I'll say 20 years, with horror movies trying to be PG-13, so you have to get the gore out, well then you put in all the extra jump scares, to keep it scary. But that's just startling. I've talked about this in videos before. To me, a jump scare is just aggravating. And when a movie relies on it, Paranormal Activity, it can get really frustrating, right? Where this isn't scary, we're just waiting for something to jump out at us. Which, again, to me, is not a horror movie. Horror movies are really about dread. What's going to happen? And in Archive 81, I had plenty of those moments. I had a lot. And even though I kind of spoiled it for myself when I got nervous about halfway through the series, I was like, they're not going to kill off, and then, So I made sure they didn't, which is something I've done since when I was a kid. I used to read Dean Koontz books all the time, and I would sometimes get nervous for a character, so I'd flip to the last 2 pages just to make sure their name's in there and go, oh, okay, and then I'll go back. So yeah, this show definitely has that about it. What's interesting is they haven't renewed it for a season 2 yet. The showrunner expects a season 2, is hopeful, fingers crossed for a season 2, but it's Netflix. You can never tell when or if you're going to get another season for any show. So if it ends here, I'm okay with it. There's a cliffhanger to it, but if it ends there, I honestly, it doesn't bother me. I think that's a very interesting ending. And so, yeah, here we go. And again, keeping in mind that I'm still digesting some of what I saw here. If you're concerned with spoilers and whatnot, by all means, go watch it. Come back and watch this video after you've watched the series. Because it's just so well put together. It's very well written. And honestly, it was just fun to try to figure out where this might be going. Alright, you ready to go into the spoiler zone? Ready? And spoilers. So you end up starting out really with this story about Dan, who restores old VHS tapes and old videos. And it's fascinating to watch him do this and realize that this is a real process that somebody somewhere is doing, probably on a regular basis. And it's fascinating because it starts off too with him buying a box of DVDs, box of old VHS tapes that the guy selling them to him doesn't know what they're worth because he doesn't know what's on them. So they're a bunch of videos, and you might get nothing. You might get a bunch of family videos. You might get movies. You might get old TV series, whatever. So I thought that was interesting, and I think the idea of buying a box of old VHS tapes, it's an interesting idea, right? So it starts off there, and he's immediately, brought into this LMG company, which we learn very little about, which is good. Because, again, if they're going to set up future seasons, don't tell us everything, which I think sometimes horror movies will do. They have the big drop of information. So it's like, so we're near the end, so here's the storyline. We're going to have the character just enunciate everything in the storyline to take some of the mystery out of it. And sometimes showing the monster takes the mystery out of it. And this show kind of avoids that as well. So it starts off with Dan. He's basically told, hey, we have this video. Can you restore it? So he restores the video, and it turns out that's a test that he passes. He's able to restore this video, and it's got melody on it. And it feels like it's a nothing video. He's like, I don't know why you want me to restore this. I don't know why it's important. So he is brought out by LMG when Virgil offers him $100,000 to do the job. And most people would go $100,000 just to restore some tapes. Yeah, okay. Most casuals would just be like, sure, I'll do it. But you get the feeling right away that this isn't random, that Dan is the one that's being selected to recover these videos. Dan has a connection to these videos, and he notices in the one video that he restores, when he goes back and looks at it again, that Melody, who's in the videos, has a picture of herself with a dog that looks a heck of a lot like the one that Dan had when he was a kid, and his family was killed in a fire. So he hasn't seen that dog in a while. The dog was not killed in the fire, nor did I see the dog for any point after the fire. Now, Dan, I mean, it's 1994 that the fire takes place, so I expect the dog to show up maybe in season 2. And it's one of those weird things where it's a show that something minor and mundane seeming could end up being something more. So I was looking for a lot of details. The funny thing is, Yvonne and I got halfway through the first episode. As you know, I'm watching the second time. She's watching the first. She was tired. It was late at night. So we stopped there because she wants to be awake. And it is a show you need to be awake for. This is not one that you want to be half asleep watching because you're going to miss stuff. But I was picking up so many details. Like Mark. Mark has this this podcast he does, which this show's based on, his Archive 81 podcast, about aliens that cross through dimensions and are trying to take over. And I thought, okay, that seems too on the nose. So the fact that Mark's podcast is so on the nose in the first episode to what's going to happen the rest of the way through the show, I think it's brilliant. And so right away I was like, uh-oh. So what's interesting to me is Mark. I still feel like there's more to Mark than what we've seen so far. And so his connection with the story, I think if we do get a season 2, we should see more of Mark, and likely Mark and Melody trying to find Dan. Because what happens is we go through this great story. There are times where when Dan's restoring videos that there's this monster appearing in the video. And what you get the sense of is that these videos are sort of bridging this barrier between the world we reside in and the world that this entity lives in, Kalego. And so it's really interesting because he starts seeing Melody. Now, what adds to this is that Dan had some kind of a mental breakdown not long before being hired for this job. We do not hear why he had that breakdown necessarily, although there was a breakup with a girlfriend, apparently part of it. But we don't see what that we don't see what that entailed, what it looked like when he had his mental breakdown, right? Because Melody is seen as maybe being a little bit off, and then Annabelle, who's her best friend / girlfriend, I guess. It was this interesting relationship between Annabelle and Melody. Annabelle has this mental break as well because she is able to see into this other world. There are people who are spiritual receivers who can see into this other, and they just call it other world, which is great because again, they don't show too much. They don't tell you a lot. So that way your mind can populate what that other world might look like. Your mind can populate what might be living there, not just Kalego. Maybe there's something else. And so they don't really show Kalego. He looks very alien. They get into Karen, which is this comet which shows up every 70 years. And what's interesting to me is, so they perform this ritual as the comet's passing over, and you've got to have, this Karenite is the name of the element, I guess, from the comet, which I thought was weird that a comet would have its own element. You would think scientists would be all over that. But, so, you don't need it, though. What we find out at the end is you don't need the comet to be around to open the door to the other area, this other world. What you need is a witch. A witch, her blood opens the door. And again, they don't get into the specifics of what exactly causes or any of that. So you could do in a second season a look back at how it all starts. They even had an episode which got into how this secret society was formed and what the plan was. And it doesn't go according to plan. Iris plans to open this door bring Caligo through and thinks that it's going to end all war and famine across the world. And it's going to be this great thing, to which others say that, nope, Caligo comes through here, he's going to kill everybody. And again, there's so much there in those 8 episodes. I'm really looking forward to watching it again. It's one of those series that I think I'll be able to watch 3 or 4 times through. What I like too is that Dan and Melody have this connection almost right away, even though Melody's not interacting with them directly through the first few episodes, because that'd be really bizarre to just start it there. They gradually work their way there, where Melody is able to talk to him through the videos. She sees him in 1994 while he's in whatever year this is set in. I'm guessing 2021, although they don't really confirm exactly what date this is taking place. Like, he has all this state-of-the-art equipment, but it doesn't have to be 2021 or 2022. It doesn't have to be a certain year. So they can really play with this. And so you have Mark, who's the host of the podcast, which, again, oddly enough, seems to talk about exactly what we're going through. Like, it starts off with them doing a recreation like you do for radio, complete with all the sound effects in the background of somebody's passed through to the other dimension, and you can't see them, but you can hear them. It's too on the nose. It's too on the nose for me that podcast is a description of what we're seeing here. That Dan, at the start of this, is trying to restore footage from this show called The Circle, which is based on Human Sacrifice Video, a snuff film that was produced before that somebody saw and said, hey, I'm going to make a series based on this cult thing, then that series never saw the light of day. So there's just too many coincidences here. And for Virgil, I don't think we heard, and he's the boss, he's the guy that's in charge, I don't think we heard all of his story either. What really got me was, so Dan's supposed to be out in the middle of nowhere, right? He's out in the Catskills. And he would do something, and within minutes, Virgil's there. Within minutes, this other woman who's his assistant is there. And I thought, for people that have to rely on vehicles and regular modes of travel, they sure seem to be there awfully quickly. So I'm not entirely sure that there isn't more going on with Virgil or with the other character, who ends up being Melody's mother, which I did not guess. And that's one of the things that I loved about this show. I could not guess what was going to happen. I could not guess how this was all going to turn out, which is great, because having watched as many horror anthologies as I have, having watched as much of Tales from the Crypt, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, Tales from the Dark Side, watching all those and still watching this and going, I have no idea what's going to happen, is fascinating. Like Beatriz. Beatriz is a medium. She's able to speak to spirits on the other side. She tells Melody that her mother's not dead. When Melody's like, I want to find my mom, and Beatriz is like, your mom's not dead. She's not there. Sorry. And then she accidentally goes across time and speaks with Dan. Now, Dan's watching the video. So what throws me is this. Was that video always that way? So if I had restored the video, would I have heard Beatriz start to have this meltdown as she's remembering a conversation between Dan and Melody, right? Or did the video change when Dan's watching it? So this is the kind of stuff that starts messing with my head, where I'm like, okay, so, And so Beatriz, understanding that there's these other dimensions and what kind of a danger Caligo could be, she does what any normal human being would do and gouges her own face off and her own eyes out. So, yeah, that was just dramatic. Very sharp fingernails, but I'm always surprised in horror movies and horror series just how easy it is to rip skin off and stuff. Like, zombies are very slow moving, but they can just relatively easily tear people apart. It's just not that realistic, but I guess for horror movies, you've got to keep it that way. In horror series, much the same. But yeah, so Beatriz is kind of done at that point. She's in the hospital, and all she says at that point is, don't let it out. And she says it in a demonic type voice too, which is weird when you consider how this ends. Because it ends with Caligo trying to come through. And yeah, Jess was interesting. Jess apparently is saved from being sacrificed as part of the ritual. So they just bring in somebody else. The ritual, the human sacrifice, not needed. What we find out at the end is all you need is a witch to recite the words and bleed on the statue, and it opens up the doorway to the other world. So all the other stuff that Samuel was doing and that they did in the snuff film, absolutely unnecessary, which I think is great. I think it's great that the ritual is being performed works, but not for the reason they think it does. So Jess is saved. She ends up being apparently a nun. But there are questions that I have. There are questions I still have, and I'm looking forward to watching it through again to see if I missed something. Questions I have about Melody. The fact that she ends up at the Visser Apartments, not a coincidence. Not a coincidence. So all of this was set up in advance. Dan ending up restoring the tapes, not a coincidence. His dad being Melody's shrink, not a coincidence. Everything that happens in this show seems predestined, which means that along the way, you could have a show that kind of talks about how there are people in their lives that maybe they think are friends that aren't really friends, which is why I was suspicious of Mark for quite a while, where I thought, is Mark actually his friend, or is Mark actually, working for the other side and just pretending to be his friend? So that kind of messed with my head a little bit. All right, so after a bit of a pause, Cassandra was an interesting one to me in that she was a member of the Visser apartment building that burnt down in 1994, and she at one point reaches through the TV and tells Dan to get out. Now, I'm reading it while it was paused. Actually, my wife was going out, so since she hasn't watched it, I have to pause this until she's left because I don't want her hearing the details. I don't spoil things in general. I don't tell her, hey, there's this great show I'm watching, and spill all the details of the plot. It's one thing that drives me crazy is people who spoil. And people who, they'll talk about a movie that you haven't seen yet, like, yeah, man, you got to see this great movie, and then they go through the whole thing, and you feel like interrupting them, saying, well, now I don't need to see it because you just told me. That's why I always say these videos, spoilers, 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 before I get into it, because it just seems like the kind thing to do. But the review I'm reading here, which is a negative one. The negative ones I always find more interesting, especially when I was entertained by something. Negative one gets into Melody and what her motives are and why she does some really questionable things. Melody, I believe, is under the influence of the mold in the building. That once you're inside that building and you're around that mold, I think it affects your behavior. I think it affects your decisions. We see that with Annabelle. Annabelle gets this black paint, which is, made up of the mold from the basement of the building. And she just starts painting over and over and over again Iris, who has been trapped in the other world since 1922 or 1924. So I really believe that even though Melody isn't as dramatically affected as Annabelle, I think she was being affected. I think being in that building starts to mess with you. I think that for Dan, being in that compound, and he was around the mold as well there, it was affecting him too. And that I think the tapes probably had some remnants of that mold. Since the mold is black and the fire, chars everything, you'd have no way of knowing. And even at one point in the show, there's a VCR that's just ruined by that mold. So I definitely think there's a connection between those tapes and that other world. And I think it affects Dan when he's in the compound watching them back. Probably affects the tapes themselves. So where I mentioned about, Beatriz going nuts and reciting the lines Dan and Melody had to one another in that one episode. It may be related to that mold, the video, and the ability to go from one time to another. And again, I think they intentionally leave stuff out. The showrunner saying that she made sure there were enough loose ends there that if they get the season 2 order, they're ready to go. So it's got an 85% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I know not everybody agrees with. 7.4 is the average score for it on IMDb. The reviews are generally positive from the audience as well. So with Rotten Tomatoes, the score 70. Okay, so 85% Rotten Tomatoes from the the critics, 72% from the audience. Now, what would bring the audience score down is the stuff that I get. There's not enough gore. There's no jump scares. It's not overly scary. So if you're coming into this with the idea it's going to be this really horrifying thing, it's not. Once I was about 3 episodes in, I was like, okay, Yvonne and I can sit and watch this. She doesn't really like the overly gory stuff. She doesn't like the really brutal torture kind of stuff. And there's none of that in this movie at all. If anything, I thought people die really easy. You slit someone's throat, like I get it, but they're and down. That was quick. And done. Cool. So, and very little blood. Very, very little. And I thought, okay, cool. And again, I think that makes it more palatable to a wider audience, where you've got your point across, that person's dead, but you didn't try to make it look really realistic, which can make things bad. The one exception might be, Beatriz digging at her own face, and then the strung out druggie that falls to the ground, which Melody is sure somebody pushed him. The other negative criticism too is one of Melody confronting people in the cult. And why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just run away? Because she's trying to save people. Melody wants to help people. She thinks she can save them. She's hoping she can get through to them, that this is crazy. Don't open a door to another dimension and let that thing out. Don't do that. Why are you people doing this? This is ridiculous. And she never really gives up on the idea of helping people and saving people. And they established that, I thought, quite well, that she wants to take care of people. And maybe part of this is because she didn't have a mother growing up, and she mothers other people as a result. They can really get into that in a season 2. There's a connection between Dan and Melody, which never gets romantic. And I appreciated that. One thing I really liked with this show, you've got a female lead who doesn't need to be somebody's girlfriend or somebody's wife. And there isn't like a male character trying to correct her on everything either, which sometimes you have, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? So she's on her own for most of it. Annabelle comes in. Annabelle, if anything, hinders her efforts. Annabelle, very, very well portrayed. I thought she was well characterized. The one thing that throws me off is when she's at the end of the series, when she's there again, and she's 50 now, the makeup didn't make her look 50. It didn't. So, because I thought, okay, are they going to get a different actress? Nope, same actress. She doesn't look 50, but that's okay. It is really, really well done. What else would I want to touch on? We don't really find out what happens to Samuel. Samuel pulls Melody out, but he's not there with her. So where did he get dropped? Did he get dropped at a different point? Like, obviously, Dan jumps through, comes out from the other world in 1994. So where does Samuel end up? What point in time is he at? Because he's got a hold of Melody, and yet she's at the compound by herself. I had halfway expected Samuel to be there and threaten somebody or something. He's not there. So she's with her mother, who is a Baldung, one of those witches, who is apparently sworn to never open up that door. They do open it regularly, though. But yeah, so we'll see where it goes from here. I thought it was really well done. I thought from start to finish it was well produced. I thought the atmosphere was well done as well. And again, this is a show that I can watch multiple times because it feels like there's a lot of Easter eggs early in the series that tell you what's going to happen later without hitting you over the head with it. So there's subtle details that looking back you go, really? Wow, how did I not notice that? And the reason is because you didn't know what you were looking for. There are times where I'll watch a show and I try to like overanalyze everything, and I'm completely off. And so in this case, I didn't try to overanalyze, still completely off. At one point I was like, okay, Mark, something's up with Mark. And then he has that argument with Virgil, who is the guy that's in charge of this, and I'm wrong. Because at one point I thought, so Mark's probably the one that's behind all this, right? And no, he's not. So we'll see what happens if they do bring it back. I'm hoping it gets renewed. And I'd be interested to know what other people thought who watched it. If you watched Archive 81, what did you think? Again, it is 8 hours. It is slow in parts, but it feels like it makes it worthwhile. Again, it reminds me of The Shining. There are parts of the movie The Shining where nothing's happening. You could cut out 15 minutes here and 20 minutes there, and the movie would be probably a lot faster, and you get from point A to point B in a much more relatively decent amount of time. but you're building tension. And sometimes with movies, I don't see that tension, especially, again, with newer horror movies. Very often I'm like, oh, this is just tedious. And it might be an 85-minute movie, and I'm like, this is really tedious. This is, wow, this is all paint by numbers and just point A to point B, and it's all really just standard story. Yeah, this is all the same as that last horror movie I watched. I did not get that feeling. Again, it echoes Rosemary's Baby, where you start wondering, is everybody in on this around Melody? Is everybody around Dan in on this? And they just don't realize their whole lives have been a lie? We never completely established that Dan's father, the shrink, isn't more involved than he's letting on. So the fact that Dan's house burns down, and yes, Virgil says, well, we burned it down, that's not fully established in my mind, and they could go back on it. But we'll see. I'd be interested to know your thoughts if you watched Archive 81. Let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Just happened upon this video. And again, really great show. If you haven't watched it, watch it. Because even after reading some of the spoilers, I still didn't fully grasp what they were talking about until we were in the final episode. And I'm like, oh, wow. And even then I got kind of tensed up. But again, they do not show in full form the villain, Kalego. They don't show him in full form because I think they realized how ridiculous that could look. And sometimes you're better off leaving it to your imagination. So there's that. But thank you guys so much for all your support. It means a lot. I will talk to you again soon.